Susan, we're ready to start whenever you.
Okay, I want to call this meeting of the Futures Committee to order. Do we need roll call with the two of us?
Yeah, we'll do for the record just a quick roll call. Trisha Canonico,
Here.
Susan Gutowski.
Oh, here.
Excellent. And then next up, we would do approval of the minutes from our last meeting in July.
Do you have a motion for that?
I move that we approve the July minutes.
Second.
Those
are approved.
Wow.
Excellent. Well, good. So today's agenda, we have a topic for Futures Committee that's focusing on the future of transportation and a specific focus on the Dutch Cycling Embassy in the Netherlands. And then we're going to use the remaining 15 minutes of the agenda to continue the conversation about the future of Futures Committee so that we can continue to think about how we want to improve and evolve this opportunity for dialogue on bigger picture items or topics relevant to Fort Collins. So with that, I want to just quickly share a participation message. So for those of you that are tuning in online, you're welcome to join the meeting as a panelist if you do want to engage in the conversation once the presentation is concluded. If not, we also have a chat function or a Q&A function that you can also put questions into the chat, and we'll be monitoring that throughout the meeting to get your questions answered. Any other logistics that we should be covering that I hadn't hit yet before I hand it off to Courtney? For anyone? Okay.
Who's that?
Okay, great. Well, I'm going to hand it over to Courtney Geary, who is our active modes manager here with the city, to just do some orientation and grounding on the Dutch Cycling Embassy before we hand it off to our second speaker, Councilmember Trisha Canonico, who had the pleasure of visiting the Netherlands recently and connecting with the Dutch Cycling Embassy. And we're just really excited to hear her insights and impressions as well. So thanks everyone for joining us this evening or afternoon, and we'll hand it off to you, Courtney. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen. Good evening, everyone. I'm Courtney Geary, the Active Modes Manager for the City of Fort Collins, and looking forward to giving you all some background on the Dutch Cycling Embassy. We can go to the next slide. The Dutch Cycling Embassy is a partnership between public and private organizations in the Netherlands that are focused on sharing their knowledge and expertise to help other cities across the world to experience the many advantages of cycling. They give cities the opportunity to experience the Dutch cycling culture firsthand through study tours, think about the best possible solutions, put these ideas into action, and learn about different effective policies and best practices. If we go to the next slide, this is the vast array of participants in the Dutch Cycling Embassy network. They really formed this partnership in response to the demand that came from other cities and was really placed on their professionals, their transportation professionals. People were reaching out to Dutch cities and asking, how did you do it? And how do we bring this knowledge here? And so they really see the bike and their knowledge around the bike as an export for the Netherlands and are taking advantage of these opportunities to put these different companies and city professionals, nonprofits together to help share this knowledge with the world. We'll go to the next slide, and I'll share just two overarching themes that I really took away from my opportunity to do an internship in the Netherlands with Houdepelkoffing, which is a Dutch consulting firm that's part of the Cycling Embassy, and the opportunities I had after that internship to do Think Bike workshops with the embassy here in several cities in the US. And one of those is that the Netherlands hasn't always been this way. I think often when people hear about the Netherlands and cycling, they think, oh, you know, it's just part of the culture. What could we possibly learn from that? And how could we ever adopt that in our city? And the truth is it hasn't always been that way. It was really back in the 70s in response to traffic incidents and really the safety of children. That it was a grassroots upswelling of residents saying, we don't want our cities to look like this. We want to make it safer. We want our children to be able to be safely in the street. And that was simultaneously the same time as the OPEC oil crisis and a spike in gasoline prices that really came together to make the Netherlands turn towards cycling as a solution. So we'll go to the next slide. I think another key theme is the Netherlands doesn't create great cities for cycling just for the sake of cycling. It really is about achieving all of these co-benefits of making a great city for cycling. We talk a lot about sustainability, the environmental impacts, economic, social impacts, but one that they really emphasize in the Netherlands is joy. And I think our council resonates with that and speaks to that often as well. That cycling in the Netherlands is the form of transportation that is most often associated with joy. And there are many benefits to mental health and quality of life as well. So if we'll go to the next slide, one way that Fort Collins has been able to work with the Dutch Cycling Embassy is to form a city partnership with Enschede in the Netherlands, which is a city of a similar size, similar population in the east of the Netherlands on the border with Germany. And they've really achieved a lot of the things that we aspire to. We were able to do a workshop with them virtually and then a series of monthly discussions on various topics like cycling education for youth, parking policies, and how they handle improvements at intersections for cyclists. And as you can see here on the left, they have already achieved the mode share that we are striving for, that we are preparing to set through our active modes plan of over 50% of active mode share of all trips. And the Netherlands is also one of the safest countries for cycling. So as we aspire to Vision Zero, we can take a lot of lessons about how to make a really safe city. And then to the next slide, they have also formed their transportation planning, their city planning on the concept of a 15-minute city, and really in Enschede, even a 10-minute city, of looking at the radius around every individual's home and making sure that they can get to a shopping center, an elementary school, and a high school within a 10-minute radius, and that they have a safe and comfortable network to get them there. Another way that we've been able to partner with the Dutch Cycling Embassy is that Councilmember Canonico had the opportunity to visit Amsterdam and was able to meet up with Chris Bruntlett from the embassy. And so I will pass it on to her now to share her experiences.
Thank you, Courtney. And I also want to thank Courtney for setting up this opportunity for me to meet with Chris Bruntlett of the Dutch Cycling Embassy. On this slide here on the left-hand side is what, thank you, is what I think most people think about when they think about the Netherlands. There's the tall, narrow homes, there's the canals, there's flowers, maybe not tulips in this case, but and then there's bikes. And, I think when anybody thinks about the Netherlands, they think bikes, and that's the most important aspect. And so the picture on the right, ignore that I don't know how to button my jacket when I'm out on a bike, but these are the OVE Fiets, and that's the national bike share program that they have. And this is at the Utrecht, which is a city, kind of a suburb outside of Amsterdam. And that's where Chris and I rode around to get a feel for what cycling is like in the Netherlands. You can go to the next slide. So the Dutch kind of have an enviable problem that maybe one day we'll experience, but they don't have enough places to put their bikes. So just about every street corner on Amsterdam, you're going to see a collection of bikes like what you see there on the left. And the picture on the right is just a small fraction of the parking at the Amsterdam Central Station. They're currently building a new underground garage for bicycle parking that will house 8,800 bikes and 450 of the OVE feeds. And that'll just barely make a dent in the bikes that you're going to find around the station. So that's what I really wanted to kind of emphasize, was some of the challenges and some of the things that they're doing well in the Netherlands with biking today. You can go to the next slide. So this is something that was really innovative, I thought. One thing they're really concentrating on now with their bike network is like ease for bicyclists and convenience. So there is a newer suburb on the other side of the Rhine River outside of Utrecht, and they wanted a convenient way for cyclists to get from one side to the other. Currently, there's about 82,000 people living on the other side of the river, and they think eventually there'll be about 100,000. And they're really emphasizing bike transportation there over cars. So they needed a way for those people to get into the city center. And the most convenient place to put the new cycling bridge was where a school was. So they ended up building a new school, and that picture on the left is the school's roof. The bike bridge goes right over it. And that way they could have a ramp that's only 2.4% incline. So it was easy for most people to be able to get up and down that ramp. And they got a new school in the process as well. And that's a pretty long bridge. I think it's like 110 meters, and it was a $7 million investment. So for the Dutch, it's really central to their transportation system. It's just not an afterthought, the bike infrastructure. So you can go to the next slide. And this is just kind of emphasizing the bike network in Utrecht. So the picture on the left is showing the bike route into the central train station, where there's this massive underground bike parking for 12,500 bikes. And that's where I was getting the first picture of me. And then this picture on the left is showing a new bike path that's out in that suburb area that I was talking about. And that's Chris with his bike on the right there. And we can move to the next one. So this one shows like the city center in Utrecht. And what I really wanted to point out with these pictures was that Fietsstraat, which it means a bike street. And so on streets like this, cars are the guests and the bikes have the right of way. So where I would say in the United States, we're still working on having separate bike lanes. Here, they've moved beyond that, and now they're bringing back the bikes and the cars together again, while emphasizing that the bikes are king on this street, I guess you could say. Oops, sorry about that. Little dog in the background. And so you can move on to the next slide. So again, kind of emphasizing the ease and convenience for cyclists. This is a newer bridge that was built just outside the train station in Utrecht. And this was again to make it more convenient for people to get over the tracks. They would have to go over 1 kilometer to access, the other side of the track. And so the bank next door to this bridge invested 9 million euro to help build this bridge. And as with the bridge with the school, there was not enough room to do a nice ramp. So instead they had to build staircase. But if you look to the sides of the bridge, you'll see there's like a groove, and that's a ramp to get the bikes up. So it's a little more work, but it's just created this convenience for the employees of the bank. And their whole reason the bank participated in this partnership with the local government and the national government was so that their employees could have an easier way to get into the city center for lunch. So I just think that really shows how convenience is being emphasized in the Netherlands. So you can move on. So this picture is, the one on the left is a bike parking garage in the city center, and they've taken vacant storefronts and they're now using them to make more convenient bike parking. And so you can see what types of bike parking are available from those signs. So there's it's, you know, some like of our parking garages here do that, and they are now doing it with bike parking as well. And then the picture on the right is the entrance to the Utrecht Central train station bike garage. And so this is inside the central train station bike garage, and you can see it just goes on forever. And you can see like the green light means there's spots available, and the red lights are showing that the spots on the lower side are getting to be pretty few. And then the one on the right-hand side shows you the services that are available in these bike parking lots. So they're really trying to emphasize that last mile and encouraging people to use public transit, but then they have, you know, a way to store their bikes at the train stations, but they can also get strollers, they can go to the bathroom, they have lockers. So it's just, again, an emphasis on making everything convenient for commuters. And on this one, you can see how the upper bike storage works, and that's Chris demonstrating that. And then the one on the right is, again, that bike garage in the central city, and you can see how the storage works there for the bikes. And that's all I have. So happy to hear if there's any questions out there for us.
I'm happy to prompt a couple questions, and then we'll see what else, who else we hear from. But one of the things that I was thinking about, Tricia, is just how it felt for you as a user of the system coming from the United States to the Netherlands and really navigating the system. Did you feel like between the signage and the wayfinding and the pavement treatments and markings were intuitive for you, or did it take some orientation?
It was intimidating at first, I have to say, and just learning like the language of their streets. So all the streets that are paved with red pavement, bikes those are bike trails, or like the Pietstraat. Those are the cars are guests there. So just getting used to that, and then once you are riding it for a bit, and I was riding in the Netherlands for a couple days before this, you kind of get used to it. But they have these shark teeth on the pavement that are painted, and basically if it's pointing away from you, I'm trying to remember, Courtney can probably explain it better, but it tells you if you need to yield or if you have right of way, and it just becomes kind of very intuitive, I thought, once you're using it for a couple days. Courtney, would you agree with that?
Absolutely, yeah. Especially, I think I had a similar experience of starting out in Amsterdam, and just the amount of traffic of all kinds in the city can be really overwhelming, and learning what the different lights mean. And yeah, I think you're right with the yield teeth. It's kind of like shaped like a yield sign, but that's pavement markings on the ground. So if it's a triangle, you know, with the bottom pointing towards you like an upside down triangle, then you need to yield. And then going to a city more like Utrecht or Delft, it feels a little bit more like a typical mid-sized city. And then you think about that comparison with Amsterdam, you know, that's like our New York, and just imagining how all of that can function together, and bikes can feel really safe and comfortable in a city of that size is really inspiring.
And I want to point out, when I was in Utrecht, it has the busiest bikeway in the world, and it has approximately 37,000 bikes passing along there. And you can just join in the traffic there and you would have no idea it's that busy.
I do want to give space for Susan, our other Futures Committee member. Anything coming up for you, Susan, whether it's reflections or questions that you might have? We'll give her a moment. I do see a member of the community who's raised their hand. I see Sandy Lumberg. Would you like to come off mute and share your question or insight?
Yeah, hi. I didn't know when was the right time to participate, but I noticed in the photographs, people don't seem to be wearing helmets. And I also noticed in the first couple of pictures, people riding on the sidewalk. And those were two of the things that I asked Tricia about in a private email. So can you address those two issues?
Yeah, I would say with the helmets, I think Chris had mentioned that it's like 2% of Dutch wear helmets. And I'm used to wearing a helmet, so I stuck with my American ways while I was there. But I think the accidents are very low. And I don't think they really feel a need for it, but I haven't seen any figures on the accident rates on bicycles. Courtney, can you add in anything here?
Yeah, sorry if you're getting any background noise from me, but yes, what I've heard from folks in the Netherlands is they prefer a proactive approach to safety to make the conditions safe enough that people don't need to wear helmets generally. And the crash rates are so low, the chance of getting hit is very rare. And then I guess the sidewalks, Tricia, I don't know if you did actually see people on the sidewalks. Sandy, I think what you might have seen is people on cycle tracks. So generally on busier, higher traffic, higher speed streets, they have facilities that are raised at the same level as the sidewalk, but separate. And that's where people would bike. Tricia, I don't know if that was what was in your picture, if there were actually people biking on the sidewalk.
I think it was more, it was the bike route was the same level as the sidewalk, as you mentioned. Yeah. One thing I did find interesting there was that electric bikes and mopeds were using the cycle routes. And as Chris pointed out, the Dutch have rules, but they don't always follow through with the rules, which I thought was a little interesting. So there is a debate as to whether or not mopeds are really allowed to be there, is what he had mentioned.
Okay, and I did see a couple hands go up. I saw Claudia, and then we'll go to Jordan.
Hi, everyone. Trisha, I was curious from you as well, after having experience and the busyness of biking and just the good energy, we're hoping that Fort Collins will replicate in the next, sort of learn from the examples of the Netherlands. What's your vision?
Thanks for that question, Claudia. Yeah, to me, it was one thing that really I took away was seeing all these kids out cycling and just having that freedom and knowing that they were safe. I'd really love to see that here, and just the ability to hop on a bike and get to your destination and knowing that you'll be safe and getting exercise as you're going. It was just such a joyous way to get around. And the convenience of it, I just really enjoyed it. And I'm really looking forward to seeing a shift here in our own city more towards the biking ability that's not just for recreation, but also as the mode of transport as well.
Okay, we'll go Jordan, you're next. And then I also see Anna Kelso with her hand up. And we have a question in the chat that we'll get to after Anna. So go ahead, Jordan.
Yeah, thank you. First off, thanks to staff and council for putting this together. Really appreciate it. I'm Jordan Williams. I'm with the Bicycle Advisory Committee and lived in Fort Collins here for quite a few years now. So appreciate it. Sorry, I missed the beginning of Courtney's presentation, but I've also seen a lot of presentations from Courtney, so I'm not that sad about it. No, I'm just kidding, Courtney. But had a question for the council member Canonico about public transportation there in addition to bicycling. One of the challenges that I've seen in Fort Collins and the Denver area is that on buses and trains, there's limited bike options for bringing your bike on or just storage capacity. I've missed a couple buses or had to wait either in like the Max or sometimes I'll take bus staying to Denver or the RTD buses too, because they only have limited options in the front. So you mentioned that people would take public transportation in and then ride their bike the last few miles. So did you get to see how they handle that intermediary step of the public bus system utilizing bikes, or were people getting bikes afterwards and renting them? How does that kind of work from what you saw?
So I didn't really hone in on the buses, but on some of the trains, they would have a separate car where you could bring your your bike on as well. So there was accommodations for cyclists to use the public transit. What was your other half of the question? Oh, yeah. And then throughout the train stations, they have those bikes, the Ove feets that they rent for just €4 for 24 hours. So it makes it very easy to rent one of those when you get to a train station to take to work and not worry about the expense of it, I thought.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Yeah, I think having extra facilities for bikes on buses would be huge. Like a trailer or something, that sounds really cool. That way you're not constantly worrying about getting there early or missing your bus because you don't have capacity to bring your bike on, which you need for the other part of your trip. And then that's a really good point too about the rental options, because I've bused to Denver and then had to rent a green bike down there, and that's as much as the bus for just 2 hours of riding, right? So $10 for a bus ride plus $10 each way, or $5 to $10 each way for biking a few miles on those. So I love our spin program here. I think it's great. But yeah, I think that perspective of what the value you get and the accommodations, again, like you were mentioning. So I'll stop talking now, but thank you for that. That's really helpful. And I'm sure I'll have another question later. So
Thanks, Jordan.
Great. We'll go to Anna next, and then we have 2 questions in the chat we'll cover. Welcome, Anna.
Thank you. Hi, Anna Kelso with FC Moves. I really appreciated your focus and attention. Is my speaker sounding strange? You guys are okay.
It's good.
I really appreciated the focus and attention to the importance of convenience in and making cycling a convenient option for transportation. I'm curious if you've given thought to, or how we as a city plan to accommodate for the unintended result of inconveniencing drivers when you're placing a high priority on conveniencing cyclists.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think one thing that came across for me too in the Netherlands was the more narrow streets. And because I biked from Germany over to the Netherlands. So I got to see quite a bit of the country by bike. And I know that narrower streets can lead to greater safety. So I wonder if there isn't a way to accommodate both here, to have safer streets, to have convenience for cyclists and convenience for cars as well. I haven't really dug into that in my thought process. I'm reading a couple of Chris's books, and I'm hoping that's something that's going to be addressed more in that. Thanks,
Thank
Courtney.
you.
I bet you have some more
Courtney,
stuff.
yeah.
Yeah, I think the narrow streets is a great example. I think it's that was another takeaway for me in the Netherlands is it's not about getting rid of cars. Cars still have a function, but it's about designing your system in a way that you're encouraged to use the most efficient and effective mode of transportation for the trip that you're taking. So we've looked at our most recent travel diary study in Fort Collins, and it was over 75% of trips that are 3 miles or less are taken by car. And that's a really convenient distance to travel by bike. So what can we do to make it easy, make it convenient for people to bike for those trips? And it's going to require rebalancing the system. We will have to reallocate some space that is used for parking now, that is used, for our wide streets, for wide travel lanes, to shift that towards more space for biking and more space for walking. So I think we need to think about how we communicate that effectively to people who may not understand why we're making those shifts.
Okay, we'll do the 2 chat questions. The first one is a specific question about in Fort Collins, did the Whole Foods contribute to build the bridge over the railroad on the west side of their store? The employees of the big USDA office building on the other side of the tracks get their lunch there. And we were discussing internally to see if any of us had that institutional history, and we don't know the answer to that question. If City Manager DiMartino or Sana or someone on the call knows the history of the partnership on that bridge, we would welcome that in. Otherwise, it's a great follow-up question that we're happy to take care of.
I don't recall the specifics of that, but I know exactly who I'm going to ask, and I bet I can find out before we're done here. So stay tuned.
Perfect. But I love us thinking and talking about those partnership opportunities because of the benefits that it brings to so many in the community, between economic development as well as improving connectivity for folks. So that's a great question, and we're happy to dig into that for you. The second question I have in the chat is, do you have a sense of how so this question is specific to, maybe we'll start with Tricia on this and your experiences in the Netherlands. Did you have a sense of how out-of-town visitors were able to access the bike network in the city? Did they prevalently drive to the city or use mass transit? So sort of how to get in, and then once they're in, there's the robust network. So what did you see in your visit, Tricia?
Unfortunately, that wasn't something that I was really concentrating on, but bike parking seems so much more prevalent than car parking. And, I was staying in Amsterdam. I was easily able to get out to Utrecht. I went out to The Hague to visit a friend who lived there. The transportation network is so convenient and so easy to access that I would think that probably most people would take public transit over driving their car into the city. I don't know if they have congestion fees in Amsterdam or not, but it did seem like the bike traffic and public transit was much more the way to go than cars.
Courtney, is there anything from your experience that you would want to add to that?
Yeah, I would say a similar experience, that it's just easy. You can fly into Amsterdam, you can take the train into the city, you could bike directly into the city, take the train between any cities that you want, and even into surrounding countries. I do remember Den Bosch, and I don't know why, the context was different, but I do remember they had parking garages on the periphery of their city. and it was free to park in those parking garages. And then you could get free bus tickets or bike rentals to come into the city center. But then the closer you got into the city center, the higher the cost of parking was. And so that's maybe a slightly different example where, for whatever reason, where they were situated, they may have seen more drive-in traffic, but made it really easy to get deeper into the city center on other modes of transportation.
Well, that's great. Yeah, something for us to think about too as we talk about the future of parking in our city. So that's great. Now I see Sandy has raised his hand again, so I'd love to yield Sandy back in. And then we also have Todd from the DDA joining us. So we'll have Todd go after Sandy with his question.
Yeah, I had one more question that I emailed to Tricia, and that was about curb extensions. And I couldn't get a sense of this from the pictures or the preceding discussions, but I would like to get some sense of how prevalent are curb extensions and how obtrusive are they compared to this country in general and Fort Collins in particular. And I actually, we could probably pursue that eventually by private emails after this, but I'd like to hear what you could say now. Thank you.
Thanks for the question, Sandy, and for the email previously. That wasn't really something that I was focused on when I was over there. So I don't have a lot to contribute there, but I'm hoping that maybe Courtney has more experience here and would know more about the curb extensions.
Yeah, they do use curb extensions in the Netherlands. It is one of those techniques to try to shorten crossing distances, both for pedestrians and cyclists, and effectively narrow the roadway as you're leading into intersections, get those modes of transportation more visible. I would say generally, again, going back to the cycle tracks that are the raised facilities at sidewalk level, generally, if you have a road with curb extensions, you typically are going to have on-street parking. And generally in the Netherlands, if you have on-street parking, you don't have an in-street bike lane. You would be up on a cycle track. So it should be, no impact to cyclists.
All right. Well, thank you for that. We'll go with Todd and then Greg.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to participate this afternoon. Courtney actually a couple minutes ago offered the perfect segue into what my question is, and it had to do with parking. And since one of our primary functions in the downtown is to ensure that all users could get downtown, that's one of the things I wanted to talk about or ask a question about. Last year there was a webinar with and excuse my pronunciation, but Inchini, right, Netherlands, the town, the city, and in their individual that they had participating, when they were asked about the order, and I guess in the cooperation between infrastructure and cycling and so forth, cycling infrastructure, parking infrastructure, we learned in that webinar that over the period of decades there was a very close coordination between constructing parking infrastructure, garages and so forth, as Courtney stated, on the peripheries of the city, to allow people to get to those points and then either bike or take transit into the city center. And rather than, what we have currently in Fort Collins, we have a handful of parking garages downtown that are centered in the very central core of the downtown. And the concern, I think, that we might have is if you are eliminating on-street parking in your downtown to make way for bike lanes, you're maybe the cart is ahead of the horse, and that you should be investing in parking infrastructure, structured parking, in other words, on the peripheries of our downtown, so people can still access the downtown and get on the edges and then take that 10-minute walk, that 15-minute walk, and or ride to get to the center. So was there any discussion in the interactions, Tricia, with how they're handling their parking too, and maybe we saw bike infrastructure, structured parking for bicycles, but were you able to see how that was handled in Amsterdam?
No, I'm sorry. Again, that was one area that I hadn't really focused on. One thing he was saying was in some areas where they had seen less car parking and there was concern about losing customers for restaurants or stores, that they doing studies that they found that a more significant number of their customers actually rode their bikes to those establishments than those that drove cars. So that's the only thing that I really spoke with him about regarding car parking. So I'm sorry, I don't have any specifics for like what your question is.
Okay.
Courtney, do you have some more information?
Yeah, I think, I think our policies and our approach towards improving bicycle and pedestrian facilities have to be closely linked with how we're accommodating parking. And maybe I'll use this opportunity just to make a plug for the opportunity to do another workshop with Enschede and bring some folks from the Dutch Cycling Embassy to Fort Collins to look at our current situation and help us to think about how we can become even better, and potentially our parking policy could be one of the key aspects of that workshop.
Thank you.
All right, next we have Greg.
Hi, thanks for doing the presentation. I find it really motivational. But I do wonder a little bit about the compatibility of Fort Collins with your experience in Holland, particularly in weather, given that we tend to be a little bit colder or snowy, and a little bit geographically, maybe a little bit more hilly. And the other is the lack of supporting, I guess, mobility infrastructure. We have a fairly poor bus service, particularly with regard to bikes. Any ideas of how we might be able to make the leap across these particular problems?
So one thing that really struck me, again, like as I was saying, I didn't just bike in Amsterdam. I biked most of the way across the country, is they would have hilly days, they would call them. And hilly days are when the wind is blowing very strongly. And I got to experience a couple hilly days and people were still out biking intensely. They're right off the North Sea. So they've got a lot of wet weather there. They've got a lot of, perhaps not snow, but we see that in the Scandinavian countries that also have a high level of bike participation. I do think we have to think about the mobility infrastructure here. I'm very hopeful that with some of the bills that have passed in Washington in the past year, that hopefully there'll be more funding coming for not just Fort Collins, but Colorado as a whole, and that we can improve upon that. Just my hope here. And I'm sure Courtney has a lot she can add on this one.
Yeah, Tricia, I think you did a great job answering that. And, I think we're working towards that in a lot of directions. We have a transit master plan that's focused on improving transit frequencies and extending max lines. The Metropolitan Planning Organization is working on Link NOCO, the regional transit plan. So I think there are opportunities for us to improve in those areas. And then, you didn't mention this one, but I think of density as another limitation, our low density. And so we're looking at ways in city plan to create, improve our housing capacity along our transit lines. And I think all of those are supportive areas and ways that we can move in that direction. Yes, we get a lot more snow. When we were doing our exchange with Enschede, they were saying that they can basically sweep off their cycle tracks when it snows, and our streets crew was laughing at that. So there are some differences. We can't just copy and paste. We're going to have to come up with some of our own innovations.
Yeah, I was thinking also about the building density, that it's good that we're thinking about that as well. Thanks for the answers. It makes me feel a little better about things.
And one thing I want to say that I forgot to mention this, that Chris kept bringing up, was that the Dutch weren't always in this great position with cycling. It's something that's been built upon. And he was saying that, so I was there on a Wednesday. On Saturday, he met with the mayor of Bogota. On Monday, he met with the mayor of San Francisco. So there's just so much knowledge that the Dutch Cycling Embassy has that's going out around the world. But he just mentioned that, people that come from other cities get really depressed when they see how great the Dutch cycling infrastructure is. And he's like, don't let that be your takeaway. Just, it's a gradual improvement that's going to have to occur. And I keep trying to keep that in mind whenever I think about how much further ahead they are than we are.
Excellent. Okay, I'm tracking all the wonderful hands I'm showing. I see Kevin, your hand is up. I'd love to yield you in. And then Sandy, I see your hand up. Do you have another question, or was that up from before?
No, I have one more question.
Okay, we'll get you, Sandy, after Kevin. And then I see Jordan's hand went back up. And then I see a question in the chat. So we'll do Kevin, then Sandy, then Jordan, then the chat.
How you doing? Yeah. Thanks so much for doing this, and it sounds like a great experience. I guess to your last point about the progression and not necessarily the immediate transition to be expected based on the fact that it is infrastructure and so forth. Excuse me. You mentioned a couple, like on the partnership front and innovation front. It seems to me that just from those couple of comments that the business community and the benefits to businesses in terms of their employee experience, at their facilities and in the city and so forth, really is a focal point for their culture. And I know there's some sensitivity in our business community around big changes, and parking seems to be this ongoing thing. And I just wonder if we can, or if maybe there's more data that you gathered or more examples that you gathered, or Courtney, if we can put some things together. But it feels like, based on those points of feedback and those examples, that there's just so much goodness there in how this can pan out, that just sharing that more widespread and saying, here's the examples. Again, it's not overnight, but as it goes on, there's kind of this benefit, and it's maybe not what we expect just sitting here. And so I'm curious if there's anything else just on that subject, or thoughts on how to kind of bring that out a bit more in our community, so it's not just constantly like this, oh, don't take away parking, you're going to ruin business. It's like, well, to me, this has been proven, and again, no one's saying to do that like de facto and instantly.
Well, just I would say that, again, I'm not an expert, I'm just a council member, but
You're doing great.
Thank you. But what you see, I've spent a lot of time in Europe, I've lived there, I've traveled extensively, is the very walkable cities. I don't think that takes away from commerce. I think it enhances it. And you're right about the collaboration there. One thing I forgot to mention was on those garages that are in the city center that are previously were storefronts. They were vacant storefronts. Those are collaborations between local businesses and the government. Parking was lacking, bikes laying around became an issue, and working together, they opened these garages so that people can access the city centers, and they have a place to safely store their bike while they're shopping. So I think that was another way that I saw collaboration between the public and private sector in the Netherlands. And I really do hope that whatever we do, that it is collaborative, and we're working with local businesses and local residents to really make sure that we are moving forward in a way that brings all those voices in and works to make Fort Collins the best it can be. That's what I would say.
Thanks.
That's great. Well, before we go to Sandy, I know that City Manager DiMartino had a response and an answer to the question about the bridge to Whole Foods. So Kelly, I'd love to have you join us and share what you learned.
Yes, thank you, Karen. I do. So fortunately, Mark Jackson, who was our former Deputy Planning Development and Transportation Director, moved to Loveland, but he still takes my, help. I need a lifeline calls. So that project I was able to confirm was part of the MAX, the Bus Rapid Transit project that went through. That's when the bridge went in, and there were no private contributions to that. It all came through the FTA dollars and or the matching city funds that were part of that. But it is, I think, a really interesting concept as we think about projects in the future, whether that might be some potential, partnership with the private sector to leverage. So thank you for the question.
That's great. Thank you so much. And I agree. It's good for us to be thinking about these partnerships as we build out our infrastructure even further. So, well, wonderful. All right, Sandy, we'll go to you. And then we have Jordan, and then I'll hit the question in the chat. So go ahead, Sandy.
Yeah, the question that I have, and this I did not email to Drusha, it's the use of bells, because in Fort Collins, at least on the trails, well, in general, like people just don't use bells. And to me, it's essential when you're talking about helmets and safety. Well, if you don't use a bell, you're going to crash probably. And I also just wanted to mention in passing that it was Greg who said that Fort Collins is colder and hillier than the Netherlands. I mean, I don't know where that came from, because the climate here is extremely mild. And, Northern Europe, like Netherlands, not exactly Scandinavia, but it's the northern part of the main part of the continent. It's pretty wet and cold a lot of the time. And the other thing is hillier. I mean, Fort Collins is totally flat. A lot of people ride single speeds here. So I don't know where that came from, but I'd like just to note that that seemed very strange. But the question is for Tricia about bells. Like, did you notice that people do use bells there more than they do here?
Yes, I would say absolutely. The Ove feats are very basic bikes. It's, foot brakes, but they definitely had bells, and everybody seems to use their bells. And coming back to the States, it really did stand out to me that we are much less likely to use them here than Europeans are.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Sandy. All right, Jordan, go ahead.
Yeah, I think with just quick note on the bells, I think we just need to make bells cooler, because I think there's probably a stigma that bells are for little kids and, people that are on not as cool of a bike. So maybe if we had like a downloadable ringtone or something that could make that interaction a little more fun. But in all seriousness, no, maybe a thought. But my question goes back to what Tricia was saying about the monetary investments that they were making. Some of those dollar amounts were pretty eye-popping. I think that you just handily threw out $7 million for a bridge here, $9 million for a new school here, and for small-ish projects, right? Something that doesn't really change the entire makeup of a city. And so one thing that we struggle with even on the Bicycle Advisory Committee is comparing the dollars spent on active modes travel to quote unquote fossil fuel based travel, for lack of a better term, meaning cars, automobiles, vehicles, motorized, and how that translates. So I guess my question is less of a question, more of a continued ask is, as we look at our budgeting for outcomes process, if there's a way to quantify that within the city of Fort Collins so that we can get a ratio that's data driven versus when we work with Enschede or make these collaborations, you know, across the pond or with other cities, we can start to put a dollar figure and comparison in our process about how much we're spending on active modes, travel, bicycles, scooters, those types of things versus automobiles. Because that's really hard to see in our current budgeting process from just my short-lived experience on the BAC. And in talking with other agencies like, you know, League of American Cyclists and stuff, even with the level of ratings for diamond and platinum level cities, they don't really have good data on that. So the more we can dig in and learn from these other countries about, oh, you're going to spend $9 million on a bridge. Well, there was a trade-off there in your city budget probably. So like, how does that work? So less of a question, more just keep up the good work, I guess.
Thanks, Jordan. And I will defer to staff to see if anybody wants to come back with a response.
I will say that in our active modes plan, one of the policy recommendations we have is to make sure that the percent of funding that we put towards active modes of transportation is aligned with our goals related to equity and environment and social goals that the city has. So I think that speaks directly to what Jordan has in mind.
Okay. There is one comment in the chat that I wanted to call out about CSU and how CSU has made a concerted effort over the past decade or plus to place parking garages on the periphery and working with the city to fund mass transit through the campus around the Horn, for example, one of our transport lines, thus keeping vehicles from the core of campus. It's been an intentional goal, and it took time, planning, and resource. So I appreciate Ed bringing that in. If you think about CSU as a mini city center, attracting not only the students but also the workforce for the campus, and how they've been intentional to create satellite parking. And then once you get there, then you have different mobility solutions to get around the campus. So that's a great model for us to think about as we consider the downtown and other future activity centers for our community. So that's a great insight. Thank you, Ed. We also have a question that may also be a follow-up or a text to Mark Jackson. There's a question or a comment in the chat from Whitney Allison about, wasn't there originally plans for part of Mason Street near Old Town to be multimodal transportation or car-free when the Max bus line went in a handful of years ago? Seems like low-hanging fruit. So I think just really exploring what that corridor could evolve into, or bring back some of the previous planning or ideas that were happening as Max was being envisioned. I'd welcome in anybody who has some insight on that comment. And it's just a great insight for us to think about the evolution of our system going forward. All right, well, we will move along. Any other hands up that I might not be seeing on my screen? Okay, I do. Oh yes, Susan, please.
Just wanted to thank you guys for putting this together. This was incredible, combining all of your different experiences. Tricia, thank you for traveling. Love it.
Always my pleasure to do that.
and you know, being such an active part of this, it was really, really helpful, but I mean, thoroughly enjoyable in terms of and exciting in terms of what y'all are doing so far. And I mean, as much as I can be supportive, I just am. I just wanted to let you know.
Thanks, Susan.
Okay. Great. Well, I have a couple of questions that I thought I'd bring in before we wrap up. But first, I wanted, Tricia, is there anything else or any other insights to the conversation that you want to add or share today?
No, I think that covers it.
Okay, good. Yeah, and I think Jordan mentioned our active modes plan, and it is a draft plan that the city is taking forward. And so, I'd love, Courtney, part of futures is for us to take these big ideas and learn from other communities and what they're doing. But then also we like to take a moment during these committee meetings to talk about what are some of these ideas or seeds we can plant for Fort Collins. And given your part of the leadership of the Active Modes Plan coming forward, anything you'd want to highlight that links really well with some of the conversation that we had here today and the lessons learned from the Netherlands.
Yeah, one thing I think I really took away today, and the council member Canonico emphasized, is the importance of making it easy and convenient. That has to be a really logical choice for people. And a big part of that is the infrastructure. And we have a really aggressive plan in the Active Modes Plan for how we improve our infrastructure. But we can't just build it and expect people to come. It really takes a comprehensive approach to our policies, the programs, the way that we encourage people, how we partner with businesses. And so, we've spelled out that framework in the Active Modes Plan, but I think that there will be lessons learned over time. I think the bike parking is a great one that we may have new problems to deal with in our journey on that path, like having to figure out how to accommodate more bicycles as we start building that ridership. So really excited for the conversation that we have today and the framework that we have in the Active Modes Plan to start moving in this direction.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for that. A few things. I know folks enjoy a summary from the discussion today, and I feel like Courtney, Courtney and Tricia, you brought in some really important reflections, and a few of the big takeaways that I have, in addition to what you've already shared. Certainly appreciate the discussion around how our bike infrastructure can really integrate into future investment in our community, whether it's through bridges connecting sides of our railroad tracks, which is very real here in the city of Fort Collins. It's very important, and loving the story around how in the Netherlands, Tricia, you were describing how they integrated the bike the bridge with the school investment. So as we're thinking about our public investments in capital, how can we also be thinking about bike infrastructure connections with those beyond just the community facility that we're providing? Is very cool. I heard a lot about collaboration and the importance of collaboration to help us move forward in the space of bicycles, because there's so many different ways to do this work and so many opportunities. So how can we collaborate within the community, whether it's the users of the system or other partners in the community, to do that? So I love that. One of the next thing I'd love to highlight, Tricia, is just the use of the technology and the digital displays of the parking availability, and just how can we leverage technology to make it easier and more convenient, as you emphasized. I thought that was really fascinating, and I'm thinking about, because we have those digital displays on our parking garages here in Fort Collins. So what would it look like to also have an inventory of bike parking spaces in that same thing? So I love that. And then the last thing, I really appreciate the emphasis in this conversation around safety. And so, yeah, making bells cooler. I love it. Thank you, Jordan, for bringing that in, and talking, and Sandy for bringing that in, and really thinking about helmets and bells and other ways to make sure that it's safe and convenient to bike in our community. I appreciate that. And then the last thing I'll highlight is I really appreciated the emphasis on how do folks making sure that our bike infrastructure gets us into the city center, and then allows us even to continue through the core on bike as well. So just really thinking about the user experience, and there's so many different folks are getting to and from different places for different reasons, and a robust system is going to help make all of those experiences and needs happen. So love pulling from all the great ideas. Any other? So yeah, thank you so much, Trisha. As always, it's a pleasure to have you share your insights from your travels, and Courtney, really appreciate you making that connection for the council member to learn from that experience, and I love the idea of doing a deeper dive with these folks, because there's some really specific technical questions here. I mean, Sandy, I appreciate you bringing in this curb extension. I mean, there's some very specific design conversations to be had. So the more we can leverage that opportunity with these folks, the better. So would love to do a follow-up around what could a workshop look like, and reconnect with these folks in more specifics, particularly after the active mode plan is adopted, and we're into implementation. So that would be a wonderful opportunity. All right, so the next item we have on our agenda is just continuing the conversation about the future of Futures Committee, and just wanted to continue to hold some space for ideas around whether it's topics you all want to explore, or even format that would be worthwhile. And while you're all thinking that, I'll just pull from some of the ideas and conversations that we've had before. I mean, one of the things in terms of the space of the topics and the content of the conversation is we certainly heard a lot from the last conversation on this a few months ago about continuing to focus on ideas that could be 50 to 100 years into the future. And so really keeping that forward-looking viewpoint as we go forward, but also finding that balance of ways that we can take some of the concepts and bring them into our, addressing our biggest challenges in Fort Collins today. So how do we still keep a conversation going that balances both of those things? Was a pretty big theme from the last time we talked about this. And so we also talked a bit about, and we tested it a little today to say, okay, let's share some of the things that we're seeing out in the world. And then how can we ground it in some ideas that are applicable for Fort Collins? But we want to put it back to, start with Trisha and Susan. If there's other ideas that you have or your hopes and expectations for this committee, we certainly want to take the time to talk about those today.
Yeah, Susan, I've been kind of dominating, so why don't you take the lead here?
Not too much a lead, but an idea. I've been detecting that we have a community that's very nervous about the term density. And I would love to explore that a bit and set some minds at ease just through the more information to our community about what density means. It doesn't mean Chicago projects. That there's so much more to it than that. But honestly, I know that that's where a lot of folks are, and I detect a lot of angst in our community about that. Yet it can be a beautiful thing. The thing that, as we've looked at these cities in Denmark, and any number of building and development concepts in Europe, they've been doing it for decades. I remember back when I lived in Madrid for a year. It was probably one of the best years of my life. But we lived in what was called a pension, but it was an apartment, a large apartment that occupied an entire floor of the building. And down below was the pharmacy that the family owned and ran. And I see that, in the types of buildings that we're doing now more downtown. Remember at the time when we couldn't go over 2 stories. Oh my God, and now we're talking 6 where Bolander is going to be. And, it's just have to kind of get people used to the idea that density is not a harmful thing, but it can be a very nice way of living that also increases our capacity. So if we can do something along those lines, I think that we would be doing a good service with Fort Collins.
Kind of funny because I was thinking along those lines too. I was coming at it from a different direction. Like we had already talked about longer lifespans, retirement, and people being able to age in place. And when we heard from the Senior Advisory Committee, or is that the right name, Susan?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. That they gave a presentation on how Fort Collins is really lacking the housing for seniors to be able to age and to move into, that make retirement more comfortable for them. And I've just, I was talking to my mom today about where my grandmother lived and how everything was walkable for her. And at 87, she wasn't relying on anyone because she had everything she needed within a few square blocks. And it's a small town. I mean, it's on the Jersey Shore, but I just think about, you're talking about the large cities. And then there's this other side of density in smaller towns, like on the East Coast, and transit into the city. So I just do kind of think about how that all plays together, like density, aging, transportation, cycling. But how all those kind of mesh together was one topic that I've been kind of ruminating over lately. So.
And I agree with you. That's why, I was so impressed with Cadence that opened up on Drake, the Volunteers of America partnership. It is the most beautiful senior living example of 15-minute community that we have, I think, in town. We can do more of that, but it has all of the aspects to make it possible, like your grandma has, of not having to be stuck at home and not having to depend on a lot of people for help. I don't know that they're all going to be riding bikes, but you know what? One of the things was that the bike storage that they anticipated would be sufficient is now overflowing, because almost everybody who's moving in has a bike and wants to use the power trailer. So it's starting. We just have to keep going. So I agree with you. That's our invisible demographic right now, and I do think they need our attention.
Mm-hmm. And then the other one that we've talked about in the past is regionalism, and that kind of came up today, I thought, with like transportation, transit, and how we tie in regional public transit into the whole thing. A couple weeks ago, the Common Sense Institute gave a talk on water, and they were kind of emphasizing regionalism. So, and that as a council priority, I think it would be interesting to kind of examine that a little more and just see where we can cooperate with our neighbors to advance some of our priorities. And that's not just something for now, but well into the future as well. But I'm not really having lots of fresh, new, out of the box ideas that we didn't already have on our list.
Yeah, what about just in terms of meeting format? Is this all still feeling like a good platform to do it virtually, and the way that we sort of split up the agenda a bit with the focus on the big idea or ideas, and then discussion and bringing in a bit of specifics for Fort Collins?
First question to answer is virtually yes. I'll tell you what, with the way our schedules are becoming, to try and travel to live meetings has become a challenge. And so it's wonderful to be able to just come in and boom, there you are, and everybody's there, and then you can go about whatever you were going to do right after that. And I think particularly city leaders, you guys have back-to-back meetings. I would love to stay virtual.
I'd agree with that.
Okay.
And then I also, I like the format. It was so exciting to get so much participation today. But I do also like the idea of the big picture and then narrowing in on how that affects Fort Collins.
Great. Okay. Well, yeah, I'm loving some of the themes here, and where we can think through some ways to evolve the concepts. There's certainly a great theme here around age-friendly community, and different examples of how that's done, from children all the way to to our projects like Cadence that you mentioned, Susan. And then, but we're also hearkening back to our session from a few months ago on 15-minute communities and that council priority. So there's certainly a lot more we could dig into there with 15-minute cities and focusing in on different perspectives of that. And then I also appreciate, regionalism is another one that I wrote down too. So I think that's great. We can continue to explore that concept. And, I'm wondering too, just with regionalism, there really is this partnership component. And we heard a little bit of that today. So whether that's more of our regional partners, whether it's private or public, just really bringing those folks together could be a really interesting topic to explore as well. And then, Susan, I appreciate you mentioning density. And so, really for me, it starts with listening to the signals in our community about where are those tensions and how could we pause and discuss those and help kind of explore those a little further with our community. And it's a great example. I'm talking about density, particularly when that's such a strong link to many of the plans and vision that you all have adopted. Let's demystify some of the things that are creating some tension, knowing we have a lot of work to do together. So, well, that gives us a lot of great starting point. We'll continue to evolve the agenda list and we'll generally keep the format as we're envisioning, but certainly as certain topics present themselves, we can adapt and adjust the format as needed, but we'll keep going forward. I'm not sure that we'll have a December meeting. Maybe we'll pause for the holidays and pick back up in 23. But ultimately, that's up to you all. So we're here to support in any way that you may need or want.
Skip the holidays.
Okay, we got to vote for that. All right, very good.
I won't object.
Okay.
Karen, will you be facilitating from now on? Because you did it beautifully.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I had stepped in when our chief sustainability officer had moved on, and so I'm happy to continue on as much as as long as y'all want me or need me.
Hope you will.
Okay, very good. So, anything from you, Kelly, you wanted to add or share?
I don't have anything additional tonight, Karen. Thank you so much, and I would just echo the comments. It was really wonderful tonight to hear both the the council perspective and some big ideas and staff perspective, and then great community engagement in the dialogue. So I thought it was a really engaging discussion. Thank you.
And Kelly, you know what? I'm so glad that you're here at these meetings. It means a lot to me as a council person, but I just like to have you here listening, participating if you want, but just your presence and your awareness is worth gold.
Oh, well, thank you. And one thing I don't know if council knows that we actually, or the community, that we participate in a group that actually has a futurist as one of sort of on staff. And so part of tonight's conversation makes me think about just, how we can share some of these topics that you all are interested in with that futurist, and we can maybe have them help generate some ideas as well to really further these conversations and bring some ideas for speakers to the table. So we'll make that connection as well.
Do they carry their crystal ball in a bowling bag?
I don't know.
Wondering. I'm just curious.
Great. Oh, well, that sounds wonderful. Thank you all. Okay, I think we do an official adjournment, I believe. Yeah. Okay.
Well, thank you everybody for coming tonight. It was so great to have so much participation, and this meeting of the Futures Committee is adjourned.
Thank you.
All right, great.
Thank you.